Okay, welcome. I'm Ryan Moore. A couple of you out there I know, a couple of you I don't. Hello, and welcome to Contemporary Sociological Theory. I'm going to start today's class with going over the syllabus, talking about some of the sort of the nuts and bolts of the class as far as grades and assignments and all that sort of thing, and your textbook, which is very important. And we'll talk a little bit about like what contemporary sociological theory is, how it differs from classical social theory, and particularly the kinds of questions that we ask in sociological theory. Sociological theory has a lot to do with asking big questions about society that as sociologists we then go out and research and try to find the answers to. So a lot of what we do and what social theorists do, a lot of what we study in this class are big questions about how the world works. That'll be kind of the theme of today's class. I'm going to start with going to the screen share mode. And so we can pull up the syllabus in the Canvas page. Hopefully you can all see that. So your Canvas page is, you know, still a work in progress, but you can see, start with the home page. It has my um, contact information um, and our course meetings. So um, I'll be holding office hours before this class, 11 to 12 on Zoom. Feel free to just pop by and um, we can just chat, or if you have specific questions about the class, I'm happy to answer them then. We'll be having these course meetings regularly from 12:30 to 1:45 on Mondays and Wednesdays. They will be, of course, recorded for people to watch over the next 48 hours after the lecture is finished. I put this picture and this quote from one of the theorists that we're going to be reading this semester by the name of C. Wright Mills. He's probably one of the most famous American sociologists who was writing a lot in the 1940s, 50s, and early 60s. I believe he died maybe in 1963, 1962. And he says here, neither the life of an individual nor the history of a society can be understood without understanding both. And quite frankly, this is one of the things that interests me most about teaching theory, why I love to teach theory, but also like why I think sociology has such promise in general. And that is that it helps us to understand the connection between the individual and the society at large. C. Wright Mills called this the sociological imagination, the way in which we can locate the intersection between individuals and society or individuals and history. And it's almost like the sociological imagination is like a new pair of glasses that helps us focus and see things from a new perspective. And that includes seeing our society from a new perspective, but it also includes seeing ourselves from a new perspective, to see ourselves in terms of where we fit in this society, in this moment in time. And I probably don't have to tell you, but we live in really critical, fast changing times. where there's just a lot going on. And I don't feel like I have to necessarily list all of those things right now. I'm sure we all have our own, kind of barometer or, a way of measuring, all the things that are changing in our world and the way that it's impacting our lives. And so Mills proposes this idea of the sociological imagination as a way of understanding this connection between ourselves and the world around us. And, he says it can be like a beautiful lesson and it can be like a difficult lesson. It can be something that, especially in when we live in troubled times, like how we're living now, it can be a difficult thing to face the realities of the world around us. It can also be a really beautiful, enlightening, and empowering lesson as well, because we come to see ourselves in a new light with a new pair of glasses with this, sociological imagination. That's what I really hope to do in this class, and why I think that teaching theory is very important, and why I hope that you'll get a lot out of it this semester, particularly in these very turbulent times that we're all living in. I'm going to go and give you a sort of a browse you through the Canvas page and the syllabus now to give you a sense of the nuts and bolts of the class and some of the really important takeaways. The modules is, where your assignments and those sorts of things will be located. It gives you a sort of a general outline of the class. Um, the syllabus is down here and also in the modules. So I'm going to actually open this one up in the module, but you have it down here as well. Um, let's see. Oh, hi, Jill. Thanks for your comment in the chat. I think we're living in World War II currently. It just hasn't
Three.
it just hasn't been named yet. In World War III, yes. World War II, we would have to have had somehow been put in a time machine. But World War III, yeah, I have those kind of moments too. And so I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about that this semester. It doesn't seem like things are going to get any less crazy anytime soon. And I'm hoping that like the readings and the questions and these theorists that we're studying this semester are going to help kind of shed some light on that. Um, Speaking of light, sorry, I have a weird thing in my room where the light kind of comes in at this time of day in very erratic kind of ways, and I forgot about that. And so I'm going to try to plug in a light to make this more consistent. Just 1 second. It's like kind of distracting. Okay. Okay. Hopefully that's better or at least less distracting. Um, okay, so the course syllabus, I was going to pull that up. Before I talk about things of substance in the class, I just want to make sure that we're clear on some nuts and bolts, especially with the textbook situation. So here again, you have my contact info, including my email, and office hours and class meeting times. But down here we have um, your required text. This is going to be very important. Quite frankly, you can't really take the class or pass the class without it. So it's called Contemporary Sociological Theory, just like the name of the class that you're in, edited by this group of people, but the main editor or author is Calhoun. So if you need to search it that way, I think that it should come up as the required text if once you log in. Um, so it should be pretty self-explanatory about how to get the book. And please, if it's not, please let me know. If you're watching this in the recorded version and you are not able to get the text, it's really important that you have that. And even if you can't pay for it immediately, I think that Perusal has a thing where they'll, allow you to access it for, I think it's like 14 days. Um, uh, in the immediate term so that you don't like get behind on assignments and things like that. Please make sure that you don't purchase a hard copy or a digital copy from another source. You have to buy it through Perusal because there are these assignments which are connected directly with the Perusal system. Your grade is basically based on these like four things, like attendance and participation, writing exercise, these weekly perusal assignments, and then your quizzes. Let me explain briefly the contours of each of these four. So the format of this course are, lectures and discussions, and you have the two ways to attend, to either attend on Monday and Wednesday at 12:30 and 1:45. If you're here, like those of you who are here now, I'll give you, you'll get full credit for the attendance. Um, and if you're not able to be here, then you have to watch the archived recording within 48 hours of it being posted on Canvas. So I'll post these through Perusal on Canvas after they're done. Sorry, I'm still just having this problem with this light, and I'm trying to get this to not be so dramatic and weird. Um, and so we'll be also in class. I'm usually going to have some kind of a question or a poll or something where people comment, both, if you're here live or if you're watching the recording, you'll be expected to not just like watch the recording, but also to interact in some kind of way. I would like this. I'm a big believer in the importance of participation, discussion, collaboration in all sorts of different ways among students. It's a little bit difficult to do in this kind of a format of a Zoom with an archived recording, but we're gonna take various kind of measures to try to make this a more interactive environment. So usually I'll put a poll up like I'm going to do today or some kind of a question for discussion, and that'll be part of your participation in the class for that day so that you're not just like passively watching along and listening to me, but also engaging in some sort of more active way. So the sociology department's attendance policy is that, attendance is mandatory in all the sociology classes, and online and distance education students must either log in synchronously or watch the archived recording within 48 hours of its posting. So that'll be like 20% of your grade. 40% of your grade, the sort of the largest part of your grade, will be based on these perusal assignments. And that's basically where you're engaged in what we call annotations in the readings for the course. So each week, you will have a perusal assignment. They're already on the in the modules on Canvas, and you basically have to make comments or questions, or sometimes I will pose a question in perusal, or sometimes you might, answer or engage in a discussion that other students are having. But you're basically going to do this like annotating, writing comments and things of that matter in response to the readings that are posted on perusal. So, you roughly have to do like seven of these annotations, read the 80% of the content, as it says here. You're expected on a week-to-week basis to be engaging with these readings. That's not always the easiest thing in a theory class. In theory, sometimes the readings are more kind of like philosophical and abstract, and maybe kind of difficult for you to understand. So one of the things I try to do in the Zoom sessions here, and also on perusal itself, is to kind of break down these readings for you, to give you some context, to help explain what's going on in the readings so that it's a little more digestible, a little bit easier for you to answer, um, and to engage with. So I'll have more to say about that, throughout the course of the semester. But for now, it's just to emphasize this point that it's really imperative for you to be able to get this textbook through perusal as soon as possible, because you're going to have these weekly assignments based on that. I believe the first one is due February 4th, like the second week of class, the second full week of class. You will also have these writing exercises. There are four of them in total. The first one is going to be due next week. The first one is just a kind of an introduce yourself kind of icebreaker assignment. So it should be real easy to complete. The other three will be more to engage you, or to help prepare you to engage with the readings and with the theorists and with the concepts. They're generally, these are not writing assignments where you have to do like research, or you know they're more kind of like asking questions that are going to help you, prepare for the big themes that we're going to be discussing, usually over like a period of a couple of weeks. And in these writing exercises, I'm trying to like help you jumpstart your kind of interest or your engagement with those ideas. So those are kind of like low stakes. These are not something, like I said, that it requires a lot of research or reading. They're more of like a launching pad for discussion. And then you have these like quizzes. And the quizzes are also not exactly like they sound. They're more of a like an open book kind of test that you would have a week to complete. They're usually like maybe about 20 questions, like multiple choice, true, false, maybe a short answer or a short essay. But they're, basically meant to cover, every 5 weeks or so. They're meant to be like a comprehensive test of your knowledge, a way of, making you accountable and responsible for the material in a more cumulative kind of way. So the quizzes are spaced out to be about one every 5 weeks. So just three over the course of the semester. The other things here are just kind of like course policies. Honestly, they're pretty standardized across the Chico sociology department as far as missed class policy and grading and work policy, late work policy, workload, plagiarism, and the use of artificial intelligence. I don't really see any use for AI in this course. I don't see any reason that you people would sort of, utilize that. So I'm asking you to not do that. I personally, as an educator, feel like AI is a real, uh, like a shortcut to actually thinking and learning. And so I am among the many, many educators who is not for the use of AI as an educational kind of tool. Now, if you have some, I will hear you out if you can make a, you know, an alternative argument to me. You could sort of email that to me or something. If you have a case that you feel like you could be made, I'm always open to hearing, an argument that contradicts the opinion that I have at a particular moment. And I like to think that my mind can be changed, that I'm an open-minded enough person that my mind could be changed. But for right now, um, the policy is like, please don't use AI in the course. And I just don't really see any use for it at this juncture. So all the rest of these things, yeah, are pretty like standardized across the department as far as like adding and dropping, expected student behavior, mandatory behavior, and then there's some information here about resources on campus for those of you who are on the or near the CSU Chico campus. I'm not sure how many of you that describes, because it seems um, that a lot of people are not very close to Chico in terms of proximity. One of the things I ask you in your first exercise is to talk about where you're from and where you currently live, just so I have a better kind of grasp of that. And based on last semester, it seems like a lot of people live like all over the state of California. But I'll be interested to read your all first assignment um, to, learn more about like where you are. Okay. Um, that I think kind of hopefully covers the nuts and bolts of the syllabus and the grading and these kinds of things. If there's a question, please do raise it. If there's something I haven't covered or if there's some kind of like confusion, does anybody have any questions who are there live? Okay, I will take that as a no. Those of you who are live, one of the things I will ask you to do is write your name in the chat so that I have it for attendance purposes. So I'm going to put that in right now, actually. Please. Okay. Thank you. So yeah, ask you to do that at the beginning of class, just so I have a record of who has attended, and therefore I can give you credit. Um, I'm going to talk briefly about the content of the course, like what contemporary sociological theory is, and the sort of like the questions that contemporary sociology poses. And then I have like a poll exercise I want us to do, that I'm going to ask you for to look at. Um, and for us to kind of like brainstorm about, what kinds of questions, we think are especially important to ask about our world as it is. As I said in the beginning of my remarks, a lot of what social theory is posing the big questions. And these are the questions that then can become like a research question that a sociologist might go out and research, or a hypothesis, that we might go out and test in a scientific way. The sort of division of labor, or the role that theory plays within sociology, is to pose these big questions, very similar to like philosophy, you know, big questions about the way the world works, about why human beings do the things that they do, about how institutions work in society. These are the big, broad philosophical questions. And for that reason, it can be um, intimidating to engage with theory for some students. And my role as a teacher is, or my goal at least, is to help you to feel less intimidated in engaging with this material. So the way that, sorry, I'm just going to go back and pull the syllabus up again. Closed it out too soon. Um, the kind of ideas that we're going to be engaging with, kind of bring together sort of like philosophy and social science into these big interdisciplinary kind of questions. So, as it says here in the course overview, we cover a wide range of theories and concepts that have influenced the diverse field of sociology from the 20th century to the present. These lineages of contemporary theory include micro-sociological analyses, symbolic interactionism, network theory, phenomenology, critical theory, structuralism, and feminist theory. Readings for the course feature up to material that address up to date material that address debates on gender, power, and inequality. So the classical theory, which a couple of you, Kai and Jill, were in my classical theory course last semester, and that generally covers thinkers, who wrote in the 19th century and the early 20th century. So it's generally like Karl Marx, Emil Durkheim, and Max Weber were considered kind of the founders of sociology. In contemporary theory, we look at thinkers from like the last 100 years. So people starting with the period after roughly around World War One. So people who, writing from the 1920s into the present day, roughly the last 100 years. And there's a very sort of broad range of concerns that those folks have it's kind of encapsulated by, this list here in the first paragraph about micro sociological analysis, symbolic interactionism. It's okay if these words are just look like gobbledygook to you right now, but over the course of the semester, we will encounter and engage with each of these forms of contemporary theory, but they're generally in involved in these questions of like power and inequality. Those are the big overarching questions of contemporary theory, are about like who has power, how do like say a ruling class or the state exercise power over people, and what is the nature of inequality? How is, inequality across lines of race, inequality across lines of class, inequality across lines of gender? How are these inequalities perpetuated, enforced, reproduced? And also, how are these inequalities challenged? How do people resist? How do people organize and fight back? These are the big questions that animate a lot of sociology. The reason personally why I think sociology is so important, the reason that, got me into becoming a sociologist was because of the way that our discipline wrestles with these questions of power and inequality. And I hope that, over the course of the semester, you will, you know, also develop a kind of a passion for pursuing and, um, critically interrogating these issues of power and inequality. So our survey of the course is this going to present primary source texts within their social and historical context. We will examine the widely influential ideas and concepts of luminary theorists like Michel Foucault, Anthony Giddens, Pierre Bourdieu, and Jürgen Habermas. It's okay if you haven't heard of any of these people yet, or maybe you've heard of like one of them. But these are some of the leading kind of figures that, inform and animate contemporary sociological theory. In connection with these theorists, we're going to discuss debates over modernity and postmodernity, crisis and change, and race and difference. We take an intersectional approach to understanding how the inequalities of race, gender, and class are interconnected in people's lives and therefore inseparable in sociological analysis. So, this is a very important part of what we're going to do that's kind of different from classical social theory, is taking this kind of intersectional approach to looking at race, class, and gender. Race and gender, in particular, are issues that often get overlooked in classical social theory, but in contemporary sociological theory, they're very, very important. And we want to not just look at race, class, and gender, but look at how race, class, and gender intersect within people's lives. And again, especially in this context of power and inequality, where we're looking at questions of hierarchy and oppression, but also of resistance, and how these dynamics of power inequality are played out in social life and also played out in people's individual lives, to bring things back to that sociological imagination. So, this course thus examines the theoretical foundations of crucial sociological categories, including structure and agency, institutions, and power inequality and inequality. Such theories are interdisciplinary in their origins, drawing from philosophy, history, anthropology, political science, communications, economics, and the humanities. So, sociology, in a lot of ways, and the thing I kind of love about it and again, a thing that kind of got me into becoming a sociologist was that it combines all of these different forms of knowledge from the sciences and the humanities. And it's kind of like, this very interdisciplinary stew of ideas that all kind of come together. And in many ways, sociology is a kind of a synthesis of all of these ideas. At least, that's the sort of the potential or the promise of sociology as a discipline. And that's going to be kind of like what we're going to be expected to do here. So look, I'm going to now try in this last 30 minutes of class to get us to think about some of the questions that we think are most important. And I'm very interested to hear what you all think about this. Now, let me see if I can pull this up. I have a poll for you today. Actually, before I go to the poll, let me set up the poll a little bit better here. Just one sec. Okay. You'll see here on the screen, this is from your textbook and the introduction to your textbook, which I didn't actually assign as a perusal assignment. It's kind of more of an overview of what sociological contemporary social theory is. But they start off by posing these six questions. And they basically are like, these are the six questions that sociological theory, whether it's classical or contemporary, these are the questions that are basically like shape our discipline and that the theorists try to pursue. And so in the poll, I'm going to be asking you, whether you find these to be, like how interesting you find each of these kind of questions. So the questions are as follows. What are the conditions for scientific knowledge of social life? In other words, like, how can we scientifically study society? How can we scientifically study human behavior, social behavior? How can we take these methods that have been applied to the natural world, to, biology and chemistry and things like that, and apply those same kind of scientific methods to the study of social life. Secondly, how is society shaped by the state? And in turn, does society shape politics? By the state, we kind of mean the state is kind of a shorthand for like the government, but also like the legal system, the political system, and so forth. So the second question is kind of about politics and the relationship between society and politics. How is one shaped by the other, and vice versa? Third, what are the social origins and impacts of markets, especially large and still expanding markets? So, this is a question about basically economics, markets being the place where commodities are bought and sold. This is the question that basically about like how important economics are in society. Fourth, how do individuality, community, and society relate to each other? So I think that's a pretty self-explanatory kind of thing, but about this kind of relationship between the individual, the communities that they live in, and the society at large. Five, what are the fundamental differences among societies? That would be a kind of like a comparative, almost like an anthropological kind of question about the differences, between societies, but also within societies. Like, for example, American society is very different if you're living in a big city like New York or Chicago or San Francisco, as opposed to if you're living in a rural part of America or if you're living in a region like the South. that is a different, kind of society than other parts of the US. We should really think of America as not exactly, especially in these times, is kind of a divided society. And then sixth, and finally, how have power relations among societies such as colonialism and war shaped individual societies and regional and global social relations? So this would be the sort of like the international questions about power relations among societies. Still, today, very important when you think about like, the United States just, deposed the leader of Venezuela. And we're talking about, taking over Greenland and, like these kinds of global social relations and the power between different societies. These are still things that are very important in our world, I would argue. And so what I want to do is basically post this poll for you and take a minute to think about each of these and just mark, how interested you are. There's no right or wrong answer here. I'm just like, how interested are you in each of these six questions? I'm going to launch the poll. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, sweet. Great. So, yeah, no rush, but just take some time, think about them. Hopefully, you can see the whole question. I suppose I forgot to say for those of you who are watching the recording, what you can do is write a comment at this point in the at this point in the lecture. You can just kind of make a comment on perusal, and maybe just put which of the, let's just say like two of these questions are you most interested in? And if you want to briefly explain why, that's fine too. You don't have to copy like the entire question word for word, just as long as, it's clear which of them it is. You could just say, which one of these you, you know, just let's just say like two, pick two of these and say what you're most interested in. And if you briefly explain why, that's even better. So that's if you're watching at home or asynchronously. Okay, let's just say I'm going to give us 2 minutes. So I'm going to give us 5 total minutes on this. And we're at 3 minutes right now. Okay. And the poll. Can you all see the results? No?
Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, okay, cool. Um, so it looks like if we had to pick a winner, it would be question number four. Let me pull up the thing just to, how it exactly is worded. How do individuality, community, and society relate to each other? Well, I hopefully, in talking about C. Wright Mills and the sociological imagination, that kind of whet your appetite for that question. I also think that this is a really important question, in part because of this middle word community. And it seems to me, and I don't know how many of you would agree with this, but it seems to me that that middle word community is the thing that's really breaking down in America. And the idea is that, we have individuality and we have society, and community is supposed to be the thing that kind of mediates between those. It's like the way in which, like, we engage in society, but like at a local level, with our neighbors, with our, various community organizations or groups, and that this is the way in which like people engage in society on a real face-to-face basis. And I don't know about the rest of you. I'd be eager to hear, but like it seems like our kind of like forms of community have been slowly eroding for a number of years, and then when COVID hit, it seems like that community really fell apart. And I don't my sense is that um, we never really totally recovered from COVID in terms of reconstructing forms of community. And I think that that we see a lot of symptoms of that. As a teacher, I feel like I see a lot of symptoms of younger people who are individuals who don't feel like they have a sense of community, of connection. Those of you who were in the classical sociological theory may remember that Emil Durkheim worried about this a lot. That Durkheim wrote this book about suicide, in which he argued that a particular kind of suicide that he called anomic suicide was a symptom of a society where the relationships of community were breaking down, and that people didn't have that sort of like connection, that kind of like safety net, like a support group in which, when things go bad, people, really need to fall on each other. They need to rely on each other. Yeah, go ahead, Kai. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that people need a reason to like keep pushing, keep going forward, to keep trying, and
Yeah.
for a lot of people, you need something not to be bleak, but to live for, and for a
Yeah.
lot of people that ties into other people, your community, your loved ones. And I think that because community, it does seem to be breaking down, um, maybe that like contributes to the rise of suicide, like if you don't
Mhm.
have, I don't know, I feel like life is hard,
Yeah.
and if you don't have like a support system, like you were saying, or something to keep going forward. For a lot of people, it's their kids or their family, whatever. But we're noticing that, more people are having less kids, which nothing's wrong with, but just people are having less kids. And
Mhm.
we as like a society, like I don't know, like they did like a study and it showed like younger people like they don't know how to make their people are making less friends now and everything
Mhm.
like that. So I think it all just ties, like you were saying, ties into each other.
Yeah, there is a study that has been going on for a while, I think since the 90s, where people who do surveys, they ask people, how many friends do you have? Like, how many people do you, like talk on the phone reliably, semi-regularly, or you meet up with them, you have dinner with them, you see them every so often. And they've been measuring like how many Americans have five or less friends. How many people say that they have five or fewer friends. And that number has increased dramatically in just like the last 10 years of people saying like that the way that they self-report is that the number, and I don't have the numbers exactly in front of me, but I know that it's a significant increase in the number of people who say that they don't have five friends has dramatically increased. And I think we can attribute that to a lot of things, probably like social media and the phone, people, the phones are very individualizing. And I feel like I see it in working with young people a lot is like they just have a harder time in face-to-face interactions and in socializing. They have a harder time just, meeting people and talking to them face to face. And so Durkheim thought that, like suicide was like an extreme symptom of this, but that you see all kinds of other like lesser symptoms of this kind of behavior of like kind of antisocial kinds of behavior of self-destructive forms of behavior. And Durkheim, like a lot of sociologists, believed, that people are basically social animals. We need each other. We have to, we are not islands of, people just kind of looking out for our own interests and competing against one another, that we are interdependent. We need each other. And that people feel good when they are like connected in community. I don't know how many of you, for example, perhaps if you'd be willing to share, I'd love to hear it. Like, how many of you have been involved in a kind of disaster situation, like where you had to help, other members of your community, like in a hurricane or an earthquake or, some sort of like context in which like you and your neighbors have to take care of one another. And it's one of these things that really brings people together. And oftentimes you'll hear people say that, this is like the silver lining in a disaster of a situation is that they get to know their neighbors and they like, they help take care of each other and that people kind of like naturally feel good when they're doing that. And it doesn't really like as a society, maybe we don't have give people enough opportunity to do that. Go ahead, Kai.
I remember when we had the fires in Southern California.
Yeah.
My family lives in Santa Clarita, and there was one that was really close to us. And I remember I wasn't home at the time, but my mom was, and my mom lives along, and I was in another state. And I remember as soon as I heard, I like immediately flew over there. And I remember seeing the Palisades fire from the sky was just like it looked like the end of the world. Like it was crazy. And I
Yeah.
remember like I went when we went to Santa Clarita and we had to evacuate. So we went to the safe zone or whatever. And it was just really interesting to see, I've never seen these people before in my life, but how we all like literally came together just to make sure, how are you? We were all like, I feel like I would never talk to these people like in any other situation, but with this situation, when everyone was just conversing, talking, like consoling each other, everything. So, just to your point, yeah, like disasters really do bring people together.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks for sharing that experience. I can't believe it's only been a year since those fires. Um, it's just, it just seems like so much has changed. Um, but yeah, it was an awful situation. Thank you for reflecting on that for us. Are there others of you out there in the class who might be willing to reflect on some situation like this for us, or just your thoughts about individual, community, and society? The other key winners in terms of this poll of interest were questions about the fundamental differences between society, and then among the questions of international power relations among societies. So these are both questions about like kind of, I guess I would say more like kind of global questions about differences and about power relations. I guess the question about differences is really apparent um, if you have traveled or spent a lot of time outside of this society. It's one of the sort of great lessons of sociology and of anthropology. Sometimes people call it what like culture shock. Like when you find yourself in a different kind of social environment than what you're used to. And the thing about culture shock is that it causes you to question a whole bunch of things that you would have taken for granted previously, So in growing up in a certain kind of society, we are all, like a fish in water, like how a fish is like, immersed in water and needs water to survive, but, for that reason, doesn't really think twice about the fact that they're swimming in water. The fish only realizes that it's in water and that it needs water when it's taken out of the water and, flops around struggling for life. And it's kind of like culture shock is the same sort of thing. Is like we grow up in this society, we move around in this society in a way where we take a lot of things for granted in terms of like, you know, the the food we eat, or the way that we kind of move through the cities, or all kinds of social interpersonal relationships we take for granted, and then we go into a different kind of culture, and things are much different, and it can kind of like illuminate. It can be really like instructive in teaching us not to take those things for granted. I don't know how many of you have experiences traveling or living outside of this society, but it can be a very kind of powerful thing. And so sociologists are always interested in trying to kind of like pursue this, to ask this question about the fundamental differences between societies and what we can learn from reflecting on those differences. And then there is the last question about the power relations among societies, about these questions that are, very much in the forefront of things today with all that's going on in terms of, global relationships, and especially these relationships of war and imperialism and colonialism, and the way that continues to shape our world in 2025, and just a lot of, I don't know about you all, but I live with a great deal of uncertainty and a certain amount of fear about what's going on in our world today. And so this is a thing that I think that sociology can really help us to kind of illuminate. And, it's like in some ways they are, it can be kind of depressing um, to confront these realities, especially, when I think a lot of us, myself included, are feeling really kind of powerless and to some extent kind of hopeless. Um, but then there's another way in which, like, knowledge is power, and to sort of have an understanding of things, we can't necessarily always change them or do something about them, but the consciousness of them, the understanding of these power relationships, is itself a kind of power on our part. And that, kind of circles back to what we were saying about the sociological imagination. I really do feel like this can be a truly empowering thing. And as a teacher, that's always been kind of my goal, um, to, try to instill in students. Um, our next class is just to give you, we're almost out of time, but just to give you a sense of like where we're going to be headed. Maybe should pull up the uh, thing one more time. Just the syllabus. Um, just wanted to show you uh, just the sort of the map of the way the class is going to go. So next week we're going to start with considering symbolic action, and we'll be reading this guy by the name of Irving Goffman, and a selection from his book called The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life. Let me just preview for this because I think it's really interesting in terms of, especially around this question of like individuality and society and the way that society shapes the individual. Irving Goffman basically says that society, he says, is kind of like a theater or a drama, in which we are all like kind of actors on stage. And we are kind of like performing a role for our audience in the same way that, actors do in a theater or a drama. So we're performing our role as, a teacher or a student, or we're performing our role as a citizen, a father, a brother, a sister, a worker, an employee. We have many of us have different, multiple roles that we play in society. And in order to give, a convincing performance as a, as an actor, we need to use props. We have to, like, say, dress a certain way when we're at work and talk a certain way. And, we have to use all kinds of ways that, we make a good impression or deliver a convincing performance depending on who our audience is. So, we act differently around our family, as opposed to maybe when we're around our friends or our coworkers, those kinds of situations, like who our audience is. will kind of shape the way that we behave differently in different situations. So these are all kind of fall under the rubric of what we call action and what is generally called the school of symbolic interactionism in society. The way, in other words, that people act and interact in these symbolic ways where they use props, and one could even say, that people kind of like follow a script like an actor does. We act in a certain kind of um, way in order to deliver a convincing performance for our audience. I personally find this to be a pretty helpful metaphor to think about like society as a kind of a theater or a drama. Um, we'll sort of check in next week and hopefully be able to kind of stir your interest in this as well. So that's where we'll be going is with the topic of symbolic and action and Irving Goffman's reading on the presentation of self in everyday life. In the meantime, before we sign off, you have an exercise that is due for um, Monday, this sort of basically introduction. Then on Wednesday, you have a making the most of learning with perusal. So this is an assignment that will basically like help you to learn how to like make comments on perusal and how to do things on perusal, as far as like the annotations with the readings. I'm not going to log in right now, but you can um, find that assignment, pretty easily. So you have to do that by next week, and that's just a way of like getting you involved with perusal. And then your first perusal assignment, as far as like doing annotations, that'll be due the following week. Okay, so that's pretty much it. If you're watching the recorded version, remember that I want you to address those 6 questions that I put up in the poll. You don't have to address all 6 of them, but just write something generally about the 2 questions that interest you most, perhaps a brief explanation as to why, and make that a comment in the perusal in response to the lecture. I'm going to be trying that out this semester, so please be patient if it's still like a work in progress. Okay, until then, I'm signing off. Thank you all, and I will see you next week. Thank you. See you
Thank
on
you.
Monday.
You let with. Yeah.
Thanks.